Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Okay, so today we're going to tackle how people over time have explained the mind to, the public.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's psychology, but not like textbook stuff.
Right.
We're going meta,
Okay.
looking at how the popularization of psychology has
Yeah,
evolved.
makes sense.
Yeah, so,
It's a good area for this.
yeah,
Especially because psychology intersects with everyday life, right?
right.
Unlike, say, particle physics,
Mhm.
everyone feels sort of like qualified to talk about the mind.
Exactly. Everyone's an expert on their own mind, at least.
Right, exactly.
So for this dive,
Okay.
we've got two really cool sources.
Okay.
We're swimming in excerpts from Jon Adams' paper, How the Mind Worked, Some Obstacles to Developments and the Popularization of Psychology.
Catchy title.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And buckle up, because he compares two books with the exact same title,
Oh, wow.
How the Mind Works.
Okay.
One from 1933 by Cyril Burt, and another from 1997 by Steven Pinker. Talk about a time capsule.
Yeah, wow. That is a huge span of time. What a brilliant comparison
Yeah,
to show how much the field and like how we talk about it has changed.
totally.
Adams also brings in this historian of science, John Burnham,
Okay.
who had kind of a strong opinion on how popular science changed in the 20th century.
Okay, let's talk Burnham for a second.
Sure.
His book, How Superstition Won and Science Lost, is quite a statement.
Yeah, it is.
He basically argues that popular science went through these phases, right?
Okay.
Diffusion,
Mm-hmm.
popularization,
Uh-huh.
dilution, and then, ouch, trivialization.
Yeah, he was worried that by the mid-20th century,
Yeah.
a lot of popular science, especially psychology,
Mhm.
became like a jumble of facts
Yeah.
without any like big unifying theories.
Right.
It's like giving you a puzzle piece,
Yeah.
but not showing you the whole picture.
Yeah, like what is this even a part of?
Exactly.
And Burnham actually says this specifically about psychology.
Does he?
Yeah, he says by the 60s and 70s, it, quote, embraced no great themes.
Wow.
So does that mean our two How the Mind Works books are just like random psych tidbits?
No, not at all.
Okay.
But they each show like a dominant theme or lens that was popular then.
Okay.
Burt, in 1933, he really relied on the authority of the expert.
Uh-huh.
He collaborated with other big names,
Oh.
including psychiatrists, which shows how connected those fields were back then.
Makes sense.
And the book itself reads more like,
Yeah.
pronouncements from on high.
Like, this is how it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I said so.
With very few citations to back things up.
Which would not fly today.
No, not at all.
We're way more skeptical now, and for good reason.
Absolutely.
We want to know why we should believe something.
Exactly.
Not just take someone's word for it.
Right. Show me the evidence.
Yeah.
And that's where Pinker comes in.
Okay.
His 1997 book is like packed with references,
Uh-huh.
and he's got this clear framework he's using, evolutionary psychology.
Right.
The idea that our modern minds are shaped by what our ancestors needed to survive way back when.
So it's like, while Burt might say, I'm an expert, trust me.
Yeah,
Pinker's more like, here's the science behind it, see how it makes sense.
exactly. And that's a massive shift in how we expect science to be presented now, even in, books for a general audience.
Yeah.
Pinker goes as far as to say, quote, in evolutionary terms, a man who has a short-term liaison is betting that his illegitimate child will survive on its own.
Whoa. That's a bold application of the evolutionary lens.
It is.
It really makes you think about how much our assumptions about, like, evidence and explanations have changed.
Definitely.
But, okay, so while the reliance on a big overarching theory like evolution is different,
Yeah.
both Burt and Pinker use something else that might surprise you.
What's that?
Anecdotes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you wouldn't think a science book would be big on storytelling,
Right.
but there they are.
But here's the thing. They use anecdotes in totally different ways.
Oh, okay.
Burt, in 1933, often presents anecdotes as, like, evidence.
Oh, wow.
It's like, I saw this patient, therefore this is how the mind works.
It's that whole because I said so thing again.
Exactly.
Relying on his credentials and experience to, persuade the reader.
Right, right.
But Pinker's got a different strategy, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Pinker weaves in anecdotes to, like, illustrate a point that's already backed up by research.
Okay.
He's making it relatable, even funny sometimes, like when he uses the Hugh Grant incident
Ooh,
to
yeah.
explain certain male tendencies.
Okay, that one is definitely memorable.
Right.
So it's not that anecdotes are good or bad, it's how they're used that
Yeah.
reflects, like, the thinking of the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bert's anecdotes say, trust the expert, while
Yeah.
Pinker say, see, science explains even these weird everyday things.
It's subtle but significant.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting difference.
So we've got this major contrast between these two books. One's based on authority,
Mm-hmm.
and the other's grounded in evolutionary psychology.
Right.
But I'm curious, does Pinker's reliance on evolution as the explanation mean there's no room for other interpretations?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's something we should definitely keep in mind as we go deeper into these books.
Okay.
Evolutionary psychology is a powerful lens,
Yeah.
but it's not the only way to understand the mind.
Right.
Human behavior is incredibly complex.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's shaped by so many
It's
things.
like trying to understand a symphony by only listening to the violins.
Perfect analogy.
You're missing the whole orchestra.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to look at different perspectives,
Yeah.
to acknowledge the limits of any one theory
Mm-hmm.
and be open to the idea that there's always more to learn.
Okay, so we've established that these two books, even though they have the same title, are worlds apart in their approach and their big idea about how the mind works.
Definitely.
But they also raise some really interesting questions about how we, as readers
Mm-hmm.
and consumers of information,
Yes,
engage with ideas about psychology.
absolutely. And that's a key part of this whole deep dive, right?
Yes.
It's not just about understanding what these authors are saying,
Yeah.
but also about thinking about how their approaches influence our own thinking about the mind.
Because let's face it,
Yeah.
we're bombarded with psych info these days.
Oh, yeah, constant.
From self-help books to social media to,
Yeah.
well, podcasts like this one.
Exactly.
So how do we navigate all this?
It's tough.
Yeah, and figure out what's actually worth paying attention to.
That's the million-dollar question.
I know, right?
And it's something we'll keep coming back to as we, keep going with this.
Yeah.
But for now, let's
Yeah.
get back to those How the Mind Works books
Let's do it.
and see what else we can find.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to dig deeper into these contrasting approaches
Me too.
and see what they tell us about how popular psychology has evolved.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating.
And who knows?
What?
Maybe we'll even learn a thing or two about our own minds along the way.
You never know.
Right.
It's all connected.
It is. Okay, let's jump back in.
It's really interesting how these two books show not just how psychology changed, but also how we take in information now.
Oh, totally.
In Bert's time, people really trusted authority figures.
Right, like the doctor said it, so it must be true.
Exactly.
I can't imagine any science book today getting away with, no citations.
Yeah.
Readers want to know where the info's coming from.
Right.
They want to check the sources themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
And that change, it says a lot about how our relationship with knowledge has evolved.
It really does.
We're more, I guess, empowered as consumers of information.
Mm-hmm.
But it also means we got to be more careful, more critical thinkers.
Absolutely.
Especially with something as personal as psychology.
Mhm.
We don't want to just blindly accept every idea, right?
Right.
Especially if it's going to affect how we see ourselves and other people.
Exactly. And that brings us back to this blurry line between psychology, psychiatry, and self-help.
Oh, yeah.
Adams mentions this in his paper.
Okay.
And it's something I've thought about a lot, too.
I get that. I read this self-help book once
Uh-huh.
that claimed you could reprogram your subconscious mind
Okay.
to, achieve anything.
Right, right.
It sounded so convincing at the time.
Yeah.
But now I wonder how much was real science
Mm-hmm.
versus just, wishful thinking.
It's so hard to tell sometimes.
It is.
Especially with psychology, because it's about such complex and often subjective experiences.
So how do we, as non-experts, avoid falling for that stuff?
That's the big question.
Yeah, are there any red flags we can watch out for?
Well, one thing I always look at is the source.
Yeah.
Who's the author? What are their credentials?
Mhm.
Are they citing, real research? Or is it mostly just stories and opinions?
It's like checking the label on a food product.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to know what's in it before you, consume it.
Exactly.
Another red flag for me is when someone claims to have all the answers.
Oh, yeah.
Or, presents one theory as the only explanation for everything people do.
I agree. That's definitely a warning sign.
It goes back to what we were saying about oversimplifying things.
Right.
We want easy explanations,
Mm-hmm.
but the mind is just so complex.
It is. It's constantly changing.
Yeah.
Influenced by so many things.
So when someone says they've got it all figured out, I'm a little skeptical.
As you should be.
Yeah. Speaking of skepticism,
Yes.
what about Pinker's, his heavy reliance on evolutionary psychology?
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating, but some people say it makes human behavior seem kind of predetermined.
That's a fair point. And it shows why we need to be critical of any one theory,
Okay.
even one as interesting as evolutionary psychology.
Well, it's not that evolutionary psychology is wrong,
Right.
but it might not be the whole story. It's like trying to explain a rainforest
Okay.
by just focusing on how the trees survive.
I like that analogy.
You're missing all the other stuff going on.
All the complexity, yeah.
Exactly.
We have to think about cultural influences, social interactions,
Yeah.
individual experiences.
Reducing everything to our evolutionary past can feel, well, too simple
I agree.
and maybe even a bit disempowering.
Yes,
If
definitely.
it makes us think our genes control everything we do.
We're not just robots programmed by our ancestors.
Mm.
We have free will, we make choices,
Like,
we learn, we grow, we shape our own lives.
so Pinker's book is great, but we got to read it critically.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind, there are other ways to see things.
Absolutely, and I think that's good advice for any information we come across, especially when it's about something as personal and important as psychology.
Right? Be curious, be critical,
Yeah,
and embrace the complexity of the mind.
well said.
Okay, before we wrap up,
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to something Burnham said about popular science.
Okay.
He seemed to miss the days when science writing wasn't just about, like, listing facts,
Yeah.
but about offering a bigger picture of the world.
He called it a religion of science almost.
Oh,
Yeah, like science writing had lost its way, trying to be sensational and forgetting its job to give people a meaningful way to understand things.
do you think he had a point?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, I do like how accessible and entertaining a lot of science writing is now.
Mhm.
It's great that more people than ever are interested in science.
It's like science is part of pop culture now, which is kind of cool.
It is.
But I also see what Burnham means.
Yeah.
There's so much information out there now.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the facts without a way to, like, connect them all.
It's not enough to just know something is true.
Right.
You need to understand why it's true, how it fits into the bigger picture.
And that's where a good science writer comes in.
Absolutely.
It's about being a storyteller
Mm-hmm.
as much as being a scientist, right?
Exactly, because in the end,
Yeah.
we're all looking for meaning.
Mm.
We want stories, we look for patterns,
Yeah.
we want to know where we fit in.
And science, when it's presented well,
Yeah.
can give us those insights.
It can show us who we are
Yeah.
and how we relate to everything around us.
That's a great way to put it. It's like science can help us make sense of, well, everything.
I love that.
The universe, our minds, all of it.
And that's exactly what we're doing here with this deep dive.
Yes.
We're talking about how popular psychology changed,
Right.
but we're also having this bigger conversation
Yeah.
about knowledge, about storytelling,
Mhm.
about trying to understand ourselves and the world.
Oh, and speaking of storytelling,
Yes.
we haven't even mentioned how Burt and Pinker use, like, literary references and humor in their writing.
Oh, that's right. It's like they're trying to entertain us as much as teach us.
I know.
It's a really interesting part of their work that we'll definitely talk about next time.
Sounds good to me. I can't wait to see how they use their writing style to, get the readers hooked and make these complex ideas about the mind more fun and engaging.
It'll be a fascinating discussion.
Okay, everyone, stay tuned for part 3. So we've talked about how how the mind works, books, reflect different times in psychology,
Yeah.
different ways of sharing scientific ideas with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that really struck me was how both Burt and Pinker, even with their different styles,
Right.
use humor and, like, literary references.
It's true.
You wouldn't really expect that in a science book.
You wouldn't, but it's smart.
Yeah.
Humor can make these complicated topics
Uh-huh.
way more approachable, right? And it can even help us remember things better.
Like sneaking in some veggies with the good stuff.
Exactly. And it shows that even when they're talking about the mind,
Yeah.
these authors get that they're talking to, well, people
Right.
with their own experiences and cultural stuff.
Exactly. They're not just brains in jars.
Right. Exactly.
Remember how Pinker uses that Shakespeare quote
Oh, yeah.
when he's talking about jealousy?
Yeah.
He connects this very human emotion to, like, this whole literary tradition.
It's true.
Makes the science feel less, I don't know, cold.
Well, it's clinical.
Yeah, more relatable.
Mm.
I loved that part. Like, he's saying, hey, even Shakespeare was dealing with this stuff way back when.
Centuries ago. And Bert does something similar.
Does he?
Yeah, though his references might seem a bit old-fashioned now.
Okay.
He uses examples from Greek mythology
Right.
and classic literature
Oh, interesting.
to show how these old stories can still tell us about human nature.
It makes you think, even though the science of psychology has changed so much,
Right.
the basic questions about, how we think and feel,
Yeah.
those haven't changed.
They're timeless.
And I think by using literature and humor,
Mm-hmm.
these authors are kind of acknowledging that.
They're building on this long tradition
Yeah.
of trying to figure out what it means to be human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not just about making the science easier to swallow, right? I
Maybe.
think the humor also tells us something about the authors themselves.
Oh, absolutely. Pinker's wit is, like, legendary.
And is it?
Yeah, you can tell he loves playing with language, you know?
Yeah.
Finding these unexpected connections, it makes his writing so fun to read.
It's like he's letting you in on his thought process,
Exactly.
sharing his own, his own amusement at how weird the mind is.
Yeah. And even Bert, though he's more formal,
Mhm.
he'll sometimes make, like, a dry observation.
Oh,
or
right.
a little joke about
It
himself.
makes him seem more human, right?
Definitely. Less like some distant expert on a
It's
pedestal.
like he's just a regular person who also thinks this stuff is fascinating.
Exactly. Which I think is important to remember,
Yeah.
Science isn't just cold, hard facts.
Mm.
It's done by people.
It's human endeavor.
Yeah, driven by curiosity.
Yeah.
And creativity.
And a desire to, understand the world.
Exactly.
And sometimes a good joke or a clever reference
yeah,
can tell you as much about that process as any research study.
it humanizes the whole thing.
It does. So as we wrap up this deep dive into how psychology has been popularized, I think we've uncovered some really interesting stuff.
We have.
We've seen how the way we talk about the mind has, evolved, how different authors use their own styles to connect with readers,
Yeah.
and how even something as simple as humor
Right.
can play a role in how we understand ourselves.
It all matters.
And the journey of understanding the mind, well, it never really ends, does it?
No, there's always more to discover.
Exactly. So if there's one thing to take away from this whole deep dive,
Yeah.
it's to stay curious,
Mm-hmm.
keep asking questions,
Yeah.
and never stop exploring the amazing world of the mind.
Well said.
Who knows what incredible discoveries are still out there.
So many mysteries left to solve.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and those synapses firing.